The auction ended with one alien girl left, until a human man paid the ultimate price. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The air was thick with tension in the auction hall. The heavy scent of metal and faint perfume lingered in the atmosphere as the final item of the day was brought onto the stage. The auction had already been in full swing for hours, and the bidders had been growing restless. There was one last lot, a lone alien girl, left standing at the center of the cold, steel platform. The silence in the room grew deafening as everyone turned their attention to her. She was beautiful, though her appearance was unlike anything any of the Earth bidders had ever seen. Her skin was a soft shade of blue, almost translucent in the harsh lighting, and her violet eyes gleamed with a mix of fear and defiance. Her hair, long and silver, shimmered as she moved, drawing the eyes of everyone present. But it wasn't her appearance that made her stand out. It was her story. The auctioneer's voice echoed across the hall, offering the alien girl as the last item. She was a rare specimen from a distant star system. Her people considered royalty, but here she stood, a mere object to be sold to the highest bidder. The bids started low, but as whispers spread about her heritage, the price quickly skyrocketed. Chanel Harrington, a man in his mid-30s with a rough exterior and the tired eyes of someone who had spent too many years struggling, stood at the back of the room. He wasn't like the other bidders, who wore expensive suits and had the air of people used to getting whatever they wanted. No, Chanel was a man of modest means, someone who had fought for everything he had. He wasn't even sure why he was here. Maybe it was the large paycheck he had been promised for helping clear the auction house's debts, or maybe it was the nagging feeling he had that he needed to do something more. Whatever the reason, when his eyes landed on the alien girl, something in him shifted. She was different. The auctioneer's voice interrupted his thoughts as the price hit a record high. Chanel swallowed hard, and despite his better judgment, he raised his hand. The room fell silent. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd as they realized the human had placed a bid. The auctioneer, momentarily taken aback, adjusted his microphone and nodded in Chanel's direction. The human bidder, 150,000 credits, he said, his tone dripping with skepticism. It wasn't the highest bid, but it was more than anyone had expected from someone like him. And yet, something told Chanel that he wasn't done. The auction continued, but his thoughts were fixed on the girl. Her eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a flicker of recognition. Maybe it was his imagination, or maybe it was the exhaustion setting in, but something about her gaze felt real. Human. Chanel held his breath, waiting for the final call. The auctioneer's voice rang out once more. Going once. Going twice. Sold. The hammer came down, and just like that, the girl was his. As the crowd began to disperse, Chanel felt a sense of disbelief wash over him. He had done it. He had bought her. And yet, he had no idea what to do next. Would she be grateful? Or would she hate him for being part of the system that had enslaved her? He didn't know. But one thing was certain. He had just paid the ultimate price for a person who was not just an object to be sold, but someone with a story, a history, a future. He had no idea what he was about to face, but as the girl was brought toward him, something in his chest tightened. He was about to change both their lives forever. As Chanel stood there, the weight of the situation finally began to sink in. The alien girl, who had been led down the long aisle by the auction house's guards, now stood before him. Her eyes, those striking violet eyes, met his once more, but this time, there was no flicker of recognition, only a guarded, almost unreadable expression. Chanel glanced around at the other bidders, who had already begun to walk away, their eyes dismissing him as if his presence in the room was nothing more than an afterthought. But to him, this moment felt monumental. He had paid for her. He had bought an alien girl, a person, not a thing, but a living, breathing being with her own thoughts and feelings. The reality of what he had just done left a strange sense of unease swirling in his stomach. The auction house attendants guided the girl toward him. The low hum of the building's lights filled the space, almost too quiet for comfort. Chanel hesitated for a moment before extending a hand toward her. She didn't take it, her gaze flickering to the ground as she stepped closer, her movements almost mechanical. A part of him felt like an intruder, but he had to remember. This was what he had agreed to. "You're free," Chanel said, his voice softer than he had intended. He wasn't sure why he said it like that. It wasn't as if she had been imprisoned, but something about the situation made him feel like he needed to justify the actions. The girl looked up at him, her expression unchanging. "Am I?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. Her words struck a chord with Chanel, as if she had expected something more than freedom. It was as though she had no idea what to make of the offer he had extended. She had been sold, her entire life reduced to a price, to a bid in a public auction, and now here she was, standing in front of him. There were no chains, no physical restraints, but emotionally, mentally, she was still locked away somewhere deep inside herself. Chanel didn't know what to say. Her words had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He couldn't understand what she had gone through, but he knew that this wasn't going to be easy. She wasn't just going to follow him meekly, not after everything that had happened. "I don't know what you expect from me," the girl continued, her eyes avoiding his now. "But I don't want to be a burden." Chanel felt a pang of frustration at her words. Why was she making it sound like this was something he had to justify to her? She wasn't a burden. He had chosen to help her, hadn't he? But how could he explain that? "You're not a burden," Chanel said quietly, almost to himself. He stopped, unsure of how to finish the sentence. "What's your name?" he asked instead. She looked up at him again, almost surprised by the question, but she answered, "Lyra." The name echoed in his mind, a reminder of the mystery that surrounded her. "Lyra," he repeated. "I'm Chanel." He paused, struggling for the right words. "I'm here to make sure you're safe." Her lips curled into a slight, almost bitter smile. "Safe?" she repeated, her voice tinged with sarcasm. "You bought me at an auction. You don't know me. You can't promise me safety." The words stung, but Chanel refused to back down. He didn't know her. He didn't know what she had been through, but that didn't mean he wouldn't try. He couldn't help but feel that somehow, in some way, he had to prove that she wasn't just a commodity, that she was someone who deserved better than this. The silence between them grew thick. Chanel glanced around the room, suddenly feeling exposed, like everyone could see right through him. The auction house had been full of wealth, full of power, and now here he was, standing in a dim hallway with a girl who had been sold as though she was no more than a possession. It made him sick. "I'm not asking you to trust me," Chanel said finally, his voice steady. "But I promise you, I'm not like the others." Lyra's eyes flickered to his once again, and for a moment, he thought he saw something beyond the walls she had put up. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was just a fleeting moment of vulnerability. Either way, it was enough to make him believe that he hadn't made a mistake, that he hadn't just bought her, but had chosen to be there for her, no matter what. She didn't say anything in response. Instead, she just nodded once, her expression unreadable. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was a beginning, and for Chanel, that was all he needed. This was just the start. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it. Together, Chanel and Lyra walked through the hall of the auction house, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the cold, metallic walls. Lyra's posture was stiff, and despite her initial resistance, Chanel could tell. She was starting to relax, just a little. The tension between them was still thick, but it was a beginning. They made their way to a small room in the back of the building, a quiet place where they could finally speak without the prying eyes of the auction house staff. Chanel motioned for Lyra to sit, and she did so reluctantly, her violet eyes scanning the room with a sense of wariness that didn't go unnoticed. Chanel took a seat across from her, his mind racing with questions. What did she expect from him? What did he even expect from himself? He had paid the price for her, but what now? She wasn't just some prize to be won. She was a person with a history, a past that had led her to this very moment. He couldn't ignore that. "So, Lyra," Chanel began, trying to keep his voice casual, "you said you were a princess?" Lyra looked at him, her gaze hardening. "I was," she replied coldly. "But it doesn't matter now. My people abandoned me. I was nothing but a pawn in their games, and now I'm nothing more than a prize to be sold." Chanel frowned, his brow furrowing. "That's not true," he said softly. "You're not a pawn, and you're not a prize. You're a person, I bought you because I believe you deserve more than that. Lyra didn't respond right away. Instead, she stared at the floor, her expression unreadable. The silence between them stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable. Chanel could feel the weight of her words, the bitterness that lingered in the air. But he couldn't let her give up on herself. You don't have to stay here, Chanel continued. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. I'm not here to control you. I'm just here to help, if you'll let me. Lyra's eyes flickered up to meet his, her gaze softening just a fraction. For the first time, Chanel thought he saw a glimmer of something behind her walls. Hope, maybe, or at least curiosity. But she didn't speak. Chanel leaned forward slightly, trying to gauge her reaction. You don't have to trust me right away. I know this is a lot to take in, but we can figure this out together, he said. I'm not asking you to trust me completely, but I can promise you this. I won't treat you like an object. Lyra's fingers twitched at her sides, and Chanel noticed her shoulders relax a bit. He had expected her to reject his words outright, but she didn't. Instead, she studied him, her gaze lingering for a long moment before she spoke. You think you can fix everything? She asked, her voice low, almost tired. Chanel shook his head. I don't think I can fix everything, but I can try, and I think you deserve the chance to have something better. Lyra let out a small, humorless laugh. I don't know if I even know what better is anymore, she murmured. Chanel didn't know how to respond to that. How could he? He wasn't in her shoes. He didn't know what it felt like to be abandoned, to be treated like nothing more than an object. But he knew this much. He wasn't about to walk away now. I don't have all the answers, he said quietly. But I can promise you, Lyra, I'll do my best to help you find them. Lyra looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Finally, she nodded, just once, a small but significant gesture. Chanel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They had a long way to go, but maybe, just maybe, they could figure it out together. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was a quiet understanding, a shared moment of mutual recognition. Lyra wasn't ready to open up completely yet, and Chanel wasn't sure how he was going to help her, but he was determined to try. For the first time, he felt like they were on the same path, even if they weren't quite sure where it would lead. The days following their first conversation felt like a slow, uncertain dance. Chanel did his best to keep things as normal as possible, treating Lyra with respect, but it was clear she was still struggling. Despite the small, seemingly insignificant progress they'd made, there was a distance between them that couldn't easily be bridged. Lyra wasn't ready to let her guard down, and Chanel understood that. He wasn't expecting instant trust. He wasn't expecting miracles. What he was expecting, though, was progress, however slow it might be. There. Days were filled with quiet exchanges and awkward silences. Chanel tried to involve Lyra in the routine of their life, introducing her to the simple things he enjoyed. A cup of coffee in the morning, listening to old Earth music, reading quietly in the evenings. But Lyra rarely joined him in these moments. She kept to herself, often sitting by the window in the small apartment Chanel had rented, her eyes distant as she stared out at the bustling city below. He could see the longing in her gaze, the way she seemed to be searching for something in the distance. Chanel had no idea what it was, but he suspected it had something to do with the life she had lost, the life she had been forced to leave behind. One evening, after a particularly quiet dinner, Chanel decided to try something different. He set down his fork, looked at Lyra, and decided to ask her the question that had been on his mind since they met. What do you want, Lyra? He asked, his voice gentle. She looked up at him, her violet eyes unreadable. What do you mean? I mean, what do you want out of all of this? He gestured around them. I know you don't trust me yet, and that's okay. But I'm trying here, Lyra. I just want to know what you need. Lyra's expression softened, though she didn't answer immediately. She seemed to be choosing her words carefully. I don't know what I want, she finally said. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. All I know is that I want to be free. I don't want to be anyone's possession. Chanel's heart ached at the pain in her voice. He knew that wasn't something that could be fixed with a simple promise or a nice gesture. I'm not going to treat you like a possession, Lyra, he said firmly, his voice steady. You don't owe me anything. I'm here to help you, not control you. For the first time since they'd met, Lyra seemed to relax, just slightly. The tension in her shoulders eased, and she met his gaze without looking away. You don't understand, she said quietly. I was raised to believe that my worth was tied to what I could give to others, to my people, to my family. But now, I'm nothing, just a lost cause. No one cares. Chanel felt a sharp pang of empathy. He didn't know her people, didn't understand her culture, but he knew what it felt like to be treated as less than human, to be made to feel like your worth was only measured by what you could give. You're not nothing, he said softly. You're not a lost cause. You're a person, Lyra, and I'm here to help you figure out what you want, not what anyone else expects of you. Lyra's eyes filled with something, a spark of emotion, something Chanel couldn't quite name. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was something. Thank you, she said, her voice barely audible. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now, but maybe I'll figure it out. Chanel smiled at her, a small, encouraging smile. You don't have to have all the answers right now, but I'll be here when you're ready. You don't have to do it alone. The silence between them wasn't heavy this time. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was just there. A quiet understanding, a beginning, however uncertain it might be. As the days went on, Chanel found himself growing more and more determined to help Lyra find herself again, to help her rediscover who she was beyond the title of princess, beyond the life that had been taken from her. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be fast. But it was a start. And for the first time, Chanel felt like they were on the right path. Together, the days turned into weeks, and slowly, things started to change between Chanel and Lyra. Their interactions became less awkward, more natural. Chanel spent his days working and running errands, but every evening, he made it a point to sit down with Lyra, to have dinner together, or sometimes just talk. Lyra, though still distant at times, began to open up in small ways. She would ask questions about Earth, about life here, and for the first time, Chanel could see that she was starting to grasp the idea of having a future that wasn't defined by what others had expected from her. But there were still moments where the weight of her past would overwhelm her. One evening, as Chanel was setting the table for dinner, Lyra stood by the window, staring out at the city. The skyline was bathed in the soft orange glow of the setting sun, but Lyra didn't seem to notice. Do you ever miss it? She asked, her voice quiet, but laced with a sadness Chanel couldn't ignore. Miss what? He asked, glancing up from the plates he was arranging. Your life, Lyra said, turning slightly to face him, though her eyes never left the window. Before everything changed. Before I was sold. Chanel paused, the question catching him off guard. He wasn't sure how to answer. I didn't have much of a life before, he said after a beat. Not in the way you mean. I didn't have a fancy job or a lot of money. I just had to get by. But I've learned something over the years. Sometimes, you don't get to choose what life hands you, but you can choose how you handle it. Lyra's gaze softened slightly, though she didn't respond. She turned back to the window, her eyes now watching the traffic below, but there was something in her posture that told Chanel she was thinking deeply. He continued setting the table, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more Lyra wanted to say. He didn't press her, though. She'd open up when she was ready. As he sat down across from her, the silence between them was comfortable, not filled with the tension it once had. They ate in silence, sharing the occasional glance, but it was peaceful. For the first time since they'd met, Chanel felt like he was no longer trying to fix everything. Lyra was still struggling, yes, but she was starting to make her own choices, to see herself beyond the circumstances that had defined her life. The next few days passed in a similar quiet rhythm, but then something changed. Chanel came home one evening to find Lyra sitting at the table, a small device in her hands. It was a tablet, one of the ones she had used to look up Earth's history, but this time, she wasn't just reading. She was typing. Chanel stopped in the doorway, watching her for a moment. What are you doing? He asked softly. Lyra looked up, startled, but then she smiled, just a little. I was thinking of doing something. Something for myself. Chanel raised an eyebrow, curious but not wanting to rush her. What's that? Lyra hesitated, and for a moment, Chanel wondered if she was going to pull back into her shell. But then she said, I want to learn how to live here. Really live here. Not just survive. Chanel's heart swelled with pride, and he nodded. That's a good start. Lyra looked at the tablet again, her fingers moving quickly over the screen. I've been thinking about what you said, she continued. About choosing how to handle things. I've been trying to figure out what I really want. And I think I want to understand Earth more. I want to see it for what it is, not just through the lens of what happened to me. Chanel could hardly believe what he was hearing. For the first time, Lyra wasn't just surviving. She was making a choice to live. That sounds like a great idea, Chanel said, his voice full of encouragement. We can start with anything you want. There's a lot to explore here, and you've got plenty of time to figure it out. Lyra smiled, the first real smile Chanel had seen from her in weeks. I think I want to start with Earth's music, she said, her eyes sparkling with something Chanel hadn't seen in her before. Hope. I've been reading about it. People say it's more than just sound. They say it makes you feel things. Chanel grinned. You're right. It does. He stood up, walking over to the shelf where he kept his old vinyl records. I think I've got just the thing for you. He pulled out a record, a classic album from an old Earth artist. This one, he said, handing it to her. This is a good place to start. Lyra looked at the record, her curiosity piqued. What is it? It's called jazz, Chanel explained. It's complicated, but it's full of emotion. You'll see. He put the record on, and the music filled the room, soft at first, then building into something that swirled around them. For the first time, Lyra didn't seem so lost. She listened, her eyes closed for a moment as the music washed over her. When the song ended, she opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. I can feel it, she said, her voice full of wonder. I can feel what they mean. Chanel smiled, sitting down beside her. It's a start, he said, knowing that this was more than just about music. This was about Lyra taking her first steps toward reclaiming her life. And for the first time, Chanel believed that she could find her place in this world, not as a princess, not as someone lost, but as herself. The weeks that followed were a slow transformation for both Chanel and Lyra. With each passing day, they fell into a comfortable routine, one that neither of them had expected but both were beginning to rely on. Lyra, once distant and guarded, was starting to engage more with the world around her. Her curiosity about Earth deepened, and Chanel found himself enjoying their conversations more than he had anticipated. It wasn't just about the music anymore. Lyra began to explore other parts of Earth's culture, from its literature to its history, and Chanel was there every step of the way to help her navigate this new world. But even with all the small victories, there were moments of doubt. Chanel could see the weight of her past pressing on her, especially when she thought no one was watching. There were nights when Lyra would sit by the window, staring out at the city with a look of longing in her eyes, as if she was searching for something she couldn't quite reach. Chanel didn't push her to talk about it. He knew better than to force her to confront the things she wasn't ready to face. Still, the silence was heavy at times, and it felt like there was a wall between them, no matter how hard they tried to break it down. One evening, after they had shared a quiet dinner, Chanel found himself sitting next to Lyra on the couch. She was holding a book, but her eyes weren't on the pages. Instead, she was gazing out the window again, her fingers tracing the edge of the book absently. What's on your mind? Chanel asked gently, his voice low, but filled with concern. Lyra didn't answer right away. She sat there for a long moment, as if considering the weight of the question. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you ever wonder what happens when you have nothing left to lose? Chanel's heart tightened at the question. He had known Lyra was struggling, but this was different. This wasn't about her not knowing where to start. This was something deeper, something more raw. He didn't know how to answer. He had never felt the way she did. Not in the same way. But he couldn't just let the moment pass without acknowledging it. I think, when you have nothing left to lose, you're forced to decide who you are, Chanel said quietly. You're forced to take a hard look at yourself and figure out what really matters. It's not easy, but maybe it's the only way to really find out what you're capable of. Lyra looked at him then, her violet eyes searching his face for something, as if she was trying to determine if he really understood. And what if you don't like what you see? She asked softly. Chanel thought about it for a moment. Then you change it, he said. You work to become the person you want to be. It's not about being perfect. It's about trying every day. Lyra didn't respond right away, but for the first time in what felt like a long time, she seemed to be taking in his words. She turned her gaze back to the window, her expression still thoughtful. I don't know if I can, she said, almost to herself. I don't know if I can ever be the person I was supposed to be. Chanel reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. You don't have to be anyone but yourself, Lyra, he said, his voice steady. You don't owe anyone anything. You're not your past. You're not what they made you. You're here, now, and you can choose what comes next. Lyra met his gaze then, her expression still uncertain, but no longer filled with the same walls she had built around herself. It was as if, in that moment, she was starting to see the possibility of a future where she wasn't defined by what she had lost. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable now. It felt more like an unspoken agreement, a mutual understanding that things could change. Maybe not overnight, but with each small step, they were moving towards something better. The days ahead weren't going to be easy. Chanel knew that. But they were starting a new chapter, together. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like they were both moving forward, even if they didn't know exactly where the road would lead. The weeks continued to pass, and Chanel and Lyra's life together settled into a rhythm that, while still new and uncertain, had begun to feel like a fragile routine. Lyra had started to embrace more of Earth's culture, no longer just through books and records, but through small experiences. One afternoon, Chanel took her to a park, a quiet spot outside the city where the trees swayed in the breeze and children played in the distance. Lyra had been hesitant at first, still unsure of how to interact with the world around her, but Chanel insisted. "You won't know if you don't try," he said with a smile, pushing open the gate to the park. Lyra stood still for a moment, her eyes scanning the open space, the grass swaying under the sunlight. It was the first time she had been outside for something other than errands or necessity. She hadn't realized how much she missed just being outside, how much she longed for the simplicity of it. Chanel led the way, walking slowly, allowing Lyra to take in everything at her own pace. As they walked, he talked to her about the little things, his favorite parts of the city, the people they passed, the beauty of the changing seasons. At first, Lyra was quiet, not fully engaging, but slowly, her steps began to mirror his. She was starting to let her guard down, bit by bit. "Do you miss it?" Chanel asked as they stopped by a bench under a large tree, the leaves casting a dappled shadow on the ground. Lyra, sitting beside him, turned to look at him. "Miss what?" "Your home," he said, his voice soft. "Your world. Do you miss it?" Lyra looked at him for a long time, her eyes distant. "I don't know what I miss," she finally said, her voice almost wistful. "I was never really part of it. Not in the way they wanted me to be. But I do miss," she trailed off, her words hanging in the air for a moment. "What?" Chanel asked gently, urging her to continue. "I miss the stars," she said quietly. "At night, when I was little, I used to lie on the grass and look up. I used to think that if I stared long enough, I could see everything, my whole world. And I'd imagine what the universe would be like, far beyond the stars I could see." Chanel was silent for a moment, letting her words sink in. He hadn't realized how much she carried with her, how deeply she had felt the loss of her home. "Maybe you can find new stars here," Chanel said softly. "You don't have to go back to find them. Sometimes, the stars are right in front of you, if you know where to look." Lyra glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. It wasn't much, but it was something. For the first time in a long while, she seemed to have a moment of peace, sitting under the tree, the sun filtering through the leaves, her eyes not focused on what she had lost, but what she could still find. That evening, as they walked back to their small apartment, the weight of the world seemed a little lighter for Lyra. She wasn't ready to let go of everything she had been, but Chanel could see that, slowly, she was starting to rebuild. She was starting to find pieces of herself again, ones she had buried under the pain and loss. Chanel had always believed that things could get better. But now, with Lyra by his side, he realized that it wasn't just about finding the right path. It was about walking it together, no matter how uncertain the road ahead seemed. That night, as they sat down for dinner, the conversation was easy, light even. They didn't talk about her past, and they didn't dwell on the future. They just enjoyed the moment. As they finished their meal, Lyra looked at Chanel, her eyes more at ease than he had ever seen them. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice genuine. "For what?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "For not giving up on me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Chanel smiled, his heart swelling with something he hadn't expected. "I haven't given up on anyone," he said, his voice warm. "Not yet." And for the first time, Lyra believed him. As the weeks went by, Chanel and Lyra continued to find their rhythm together. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Lyra had begun to integrate more into life on Earth, though there were still moments when she pulled back into herself, as if the weight of her past was too much to bear. Chanel understood. She had spent so long living in the shadows of her former life, and now, in this strange new world, it was difficult to leave behind everything she had known. But still she tried. And every day, Chanel saw more of the person she was becoming. They had taken small steps together, sometimes just sitting in the park, or Lyra reading books about Earth's history, sometimes even laughing over simple things like a funny movie or a meal they cooked together. Lyra had a quiet strength about her, one that Chanel admired more each day. But even with all the progress, there were days when Lyra would retreat into silence, her eyes distant, her thoughts seemingly far away. One evening, Chanel came home to find her sitting on the couch, staring at an old photograph of her family. He knew it wasn't just a picture. It was a piece of her past, one that she couldn't escape. "Lyra," Chanel said softly, sitting beside her. She didn't look up. "What is it?" he asked gently. Lyra's hand trembled slightly as she held the photo, her thumb brushing over the faces of the people she had once known. "I'm not who I was," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be who I am now." Chanel sighed, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "You're allowed to change," he said softly. "You're allowed to figure it out. It doesn't happen all at once. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You just have to take it one step at a time." Lyra finally looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "What if the person I'm becoming isn't someone I can live with?" she asked. "What if I'm too far gone?" Chanel reached out, placing a hand on hers, the warmth of his touch offering comfort. "Lyra," he said softly, "I don't think you're too far gone. You're just finding your way, and you don't have to do it alone. I'm here, and no matter what, I'll help you figure it out." She looked at him for a long time, her gaze searching his face, as if looking for the truth in his words. Finally, she nodded, just a small movement, but it was enough. "I don't know what comes next," she said, her voice steadying, "but I'm starting to believe I can figure it out." Chanel smiled at her, his heart lifting. "I believe you can," he said. Over the next few days, something shifted in the way Lyra carried herself. She began to engage more with the world around her, asking questions, exploring new ideas, and allowing herself to dream, even if just for a moment. Chanel could see the spark of hope growing within her. It was small, but it was there. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Lyra turned to him with a thoughtful expression on her face. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice hesitant but determined. "I think I want to go back to school, learn more about Earth, about everything." Chanel's eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't expected her to take that step so soon, but he couldn't hide his pride. "That's a big decision," he said, his voice full of encouragement. "But I think it's a great idea. You've got so much potential, Lyra. You can do anything you set your mind to." Lyra smiled, a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. "I'm ready," she said quietly. "To try anyway." Chanel felt a swell of pride and hope. This wasn't just about finding a new path for Lyra. It was about watching her reclaim her life, piece by piece. As the days passed, Lyra took small but meaningful steps toward her new goal. She enrolled in classes at a local community center, where she could learn about Earth's culture, its history, and its people. Chanel continued to support her, offering encouragement and advice when she needed it. But for the most part, he watched with admiration as she grew more confident, more sure of herself. It wasn't always easy. There were days when she felt overwhelmed, when the doubts crept in, but Chanel was always there, offering a steady presence, a reminder that she didn't have to face the world alone. Together, they built a new life, a life that was full of challenges, but also full of possibilities. It was a life they were both still figuring out, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. As the months passed, Lyra settled into her new life in a way that even Chanel had not expected. The classes she had enrolled in opened doors for her that she hadn't even known existed. She devoured books on Earth's history, philosophy, and science, asking questions that challenged Chanel's own understanding of the world. It was clear that Lyra's mind was a vast, untapped well of curiosity and intelligence, one that had been stifled for far too long. Chanel watched as she grew more confident, more self-assured with each passing day. But with this newfound confidence came new challenges. There were moments when Lyra would falter, when the weight of her past would threaten to pull her under. She would retreat to the quiet corners of their apartment, her thoughts lost in the memories of what she had once been, the royalty she had lost, the life she had been forced to abandon. Chanel didn't push her. He knew better than to rush her through her healing. Instead, he was there when she needed him, offering a quiet presence, an understanding that didn't require explanations. One evening, as the two of them sat together in their living room, Lyra put down her book, her eyes heavy with a mixture of exhaustion and contemplation. "Do you ever feel like you've lost something?" she began slowly, her voice carrying a sadness that Chanel had come to recognize. "But you don't even know what it is? Like there's a part of you that's still missing, even when everything else is finally falling into place." Chanel looked at her, his heart aching for the struggles she still faced. "I think that's something we all feel at some point," he said quietly. "Losing a part of yourself is hard. But sometimes, the things you think you've lost, you can find them again, even in unexpected places." Lyra stared at the floor, her fingers tracing the edges of the book in her lap. "I don't know if I can ever be who I was," she murmured. "I don't even know if I want to be." Chanel's heart clenched. He could see the weight in her words, the uncertainty that still lingered beneath her confident exterior. "You don't have to be who you were," he said gently, his voice steady. "You can be someone new, someone better, someone who's free." Lyra's eyes met his, searching his face as if looking for the truth in his words. She didn't respond immediately, but there was a small flicker of something in her gaze, a spark of hope, perhaps. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Chanel to believe that, someday, she would find her way. Over the next few weeks, Lyra continued her studies, but she also began to take more active steps in shaping her future. She started volunteering at local shelters, helping others who had been displaced, lost, or in need of a fresh start. It was her way of giving back, of proving to herself that she could be more than her past. Chanel supported her every step of the way, watching as Lyra found a sense of purpose in helping others. It wasn't just about education anymore. It was about connection, about making a difference in the world around her. One afternoon, after returning from a long day of volunteering, Lyra sat down with Chanel, a look of determination in her eyes. "I want to do more," she said, her voice firm. "I want to make a real impact. Not just here, but everywhere." Chanel smiled at her, proud of the woman she was becoming. "I think you can," he said. "I think you're capable of anything you set your mind to." Lyra's smile was small but genuine. "It's not going to be easy," she said, her tone serious. "But I'm ready. I'm finally ready to move forward, to find out who I really am." Chanel nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "And I'll be here, every step of the way." The days ahead were still uncertain. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But for the first time, Lyra wasn't afraid to face them. She was ready to embrace the unknown, to step into the future with courage and hope. And Chanel knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever came next, they would face it together. The path ahead was theirs to walk, and with each step, Lyra was finding herself, piece by piece. She was becoming the person she was always meant to be, not defined by her past, but by the choices she made in the present. And that, Chanel thought, was the most powerful thing of all.